of establishment politics, and they want real change.
Welcome to New Libs on the Block. I'm Andy Smith.
I'm Brion Curran.
I'm Kristi Pursell.
Hello, everybody. So we are right at the precipice of the busiest time of the year for us as legislators.
The most time of the year.
That's excellent.
Great.
Wasn't expecting that, but that's
Lovely.
excellent. It is a super busy time. So after Passover and Easter, if you celebrate that week, we have a brief break. And then basically it is 4 weeks-ish of
Five.
a lot of negotiation, and we are on the floor all the time. These are when you get those late night sessions normally. And I'm telling you all this not so you feel sorry for us, but so you understand why we are doing sort of a mini season finale today. So we wanted to kind of go over the next couple of weeks for the podcast. So obviously you're listening to this new episode today. We will be gone for the next month and a half or so, probably until end of May, more likely first week of June, where we can go over all of the policy and budget bills that were passed and talked about what actually happened during those negotiations, because we know that we will not be able to record for the next couple of weeks.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, so we are sorry about that, but it is for both our mental health and perhaps more importantly for all of Minnesota that we do well on these bills, and we don't feel like we could do both. So we will be back. Don't freak out next week when you don't see us, but we have still a great show now, and we thought we'd do something really fun as sort of our mini, dramatic climax to our season, which is the interns are taking over.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we have interns in the Minnesota House, or some of us do, and we ask them just like, what are questions you would want legislators to answer in like a very candid way? And they can be about official stuff, they can be about non-official stuff, silly, serious, and our interns sent us a list of questions, and we've organized them, and we're going to answer them.
Some good questions from these young minds.
Kristi, Brion, are you nervous about this? I'm a little nervous.
I don't know. We'll see. You know, on New Libs, sometimes the direction just takes off in a way that we never expected. So we'll see.
Yeah, and that is maybe fun for the listeners and makes us all a little bit nervous, but it's going to be okay. That's at least for the Speaker Emerita of the House.
That's right.
Melissa Hortman. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.
It's going to be fine. Play it cool, as another of our colleagues usually says. All right, so we're going to start off with a sort of broad question, and we've talked about this on the podcast before. So let's do this in like quick 2-sentence or so answers on this one. How did you first become interested in politics? Brion, you unfortunately did a very good nod, so I'm going to make you answer first.
Sure. All right. How I became interested in politics. I care about my community, and somebody asked me to run for office, and that's how it happened.
Excellent.
Yep.
Kristi?
I moved back to a community and was feeling pretty disconnected, and then had a really horrible congressman who wouldn't show up, wouldn't come to the district, wouldn't have town halls at the same time that Trump was in the White House. And so I got pretty fired up and made the connections with my community and felt like I could be decent at representing them. And someone asked me.
Yep. Nice.
How about you, Andy Smith?
So the quick answer is, as we've talked about on previous episodes, I was trained in religious circles to be a pastor. And because of a lot of reasons, the community I was a part of in the religious sphere, I felt like wasn't reflecting the values that I had been taught and wanted to live. And so that led me away from that calling. But central to, I think, good religious practice is organizing people to make the world better. And so even when I was outside of those circles, I gravitated towards that. And at its best, that's what politics should be for our entire society, that we organize people to make the most good happen for the most amount of people. And so I think broad overviews, that's what attracted me to this.
Good one.
So, our first question from interns: what's your thought process for choosing committees that you're interested in? And has anything changed between your first session and now, since we've had some time under our belt? Andy, what do you think about that?
This is very fun. I don't even know if we're allowed to say this, but let's say it anyway. So literally they give us like a sheet of paper
Mhm.
that has all the committees listed on it. And we list out, I think it's usually 5, sometimes it's 6. It depends on if you're in the majority or not, which ones you want to be on. And there's a way that you can like at the bottom say like why you want to get on stuff, or obviously we have conversations with leadership about this outside of just this piece of paper. But at some point there's a piece of paper that's passed out that we fill out about what is interesting to us, which I just think is like a fascinating,
Mhm.
at the end of it, we're all humans and there has to be a form, or there has to be, we have to figure it out some way, which I think is fun. As far as interested in, I mean, a lot of us have our stories and we come to this job with emphases or maybe just stories we've heard from constituents or friends or family, and that leads us to want to serve in particular capacities. When I came in, I knew for sure that I wanted to serve in 2 committees. It was taxes, because I really believe that income inequality is the root of so many of our problems, keeping the rich accountable and making our tax system work for regular working Americans and Minnesotans. And I wanted to be in health, because I think one of the most fundamental transformational things we can do is if we had a single payer healthcare system in our state, or at the very least made insurance more accessible for people and healthcare more accessible. So those are the 2 that I knew, put those at the top of the list. And then I got on other things, learned other things, was attracted to other things. I knew when I had this session was agriculture, and that literally happened because I had so many constituents ask me questions about this field, come to me with problems, or come with things to solutions, or come with me with questions about ag that I wasn't expecting. It wasn't something that I was expert at beforehand, but felt compelled to do so because of constituents and people in my area of the state that I represent in southeastern Minnesota. So that's committees.
And I got tired of helping Andy figure out the world of agriculture. So now he knows it all himself. And he is the co-vice chair of the Ag Committee.
I love that.
I truly asked Kristi so many questions. I still do, but less now. But in the first session that I was there, like, since we have a moment to praise Kristi and being able to answer.
That's not what this is. That's
Why not?
I know you're Minnesotan, and this is gonna make you uncomfortable.
We can
but
praise
Kristi
Kristi.
Pursell
I
is
can edit it out
knowledgeable,
also.
a very good legislator, and I'm very, very thankful because we can't be experts in everything.
That's right.
But we're asked to vote on things, and we're asked to represent people in very important ways. And we need each other's help. We need to be able to have the humility to ask questions, but also have someone who's willing to teach. So thanks, Kristi.
Well, and I'll go next because Andy and I did a little bit of a switcheroo this term from the last 2 years, the first biennium that all 3 of us were elected. So I apparently am the last rural Democrat in the House, and I farmed for 10 years. I worked at a clean water nonprofit that worked predominantly with agriculture. I live in a ag heavy area in southeast Minnesota, and so my very first year was really excited to be on the Ag Committee. I'd actually testified on the Ag Committee several times when my predecessor was on it. And he had told me, you should say you'd be willing to be vice chair. And I was like, I don't even know what that entails. We were brand new. And I trusted Todd Lippert. And I said I would be vice chair. And they put me as vice chair in my very first year. And I learned over the course of time that I actually knew a lot more about agriculture than a lot of our colleagues.
Yeah.
And so I was very happy to share the knowledge that I have. And then, so my first term, I was on the Ag Committee. I was on the Environment Natural Resources Committee, because that's sort of the lens with which my career has been in the last 10, 15 years, has been kind of the intersection of ag and environment. Then I was on Education Finance. I have 3 different school districts in my district, and was involved at as a parent and as a community member with school issues, and then was on elections and having concerns around voter intimidation and all of the things, Russian interference and all these things. I was really keen to be on elections. Now this year I'm only on 3 committees. Last year was 4. So I traded in agriculture, and I get to be on health this year. And the reason for that for me, well, I still have a municipally owned hospital in my district in Northfield, which is quite unusual at this point. It hasn't been snapped up by the big dogs. And just for rural people, access to healthcare is super, super important. And I love the Ag Committee, but I feel like I know a lot of what's happening there. So health has been a really, really interesting and a stretch for me this year. I had a lot to learn. And then I'm also on the Rules Committee, which today, on Tuesday this week, you can watch the YouTube. Our meeting, we made it under the minute mark.
Wow.
So Harry Niska just really plowed right through our agenda, which was just approving the bills that we're going to have on the floor for Thursday. But it'd been running about 90 seconds. So he really
trimmed it down.
Yep.
I
guess Ryan Winkler used to do it in like 45. So
I was wondering why your meetings were going so long, over a minute.
so long, yes. So those are where I am now. Oh, and I guess I'm still on the Environment Committee, and I am co-vice chair of that committee this time around. How about you, Brion?
Yeah, so my thought process for picking committees, the same as yours. So my background lies in human services and in public safety. So when I first ran, I knew that those were areas that I could probably be useful in the legislature, and just kind of taking a look at who is already in office and understanding a little bit about folks. There didn't appear to be anyone with sort of the same experience that I had, so I thought that was kind of cool. And there's a really important and unique intersection between human services and public safety. So certainly something that I was passionate about going into my first term, and was super, super lucky to get on both of those committees my first time around. As Andy mentioned, there's a list. You rank them, your number one choice down to 5 or 6, and why and what you have to offer for the committee. So human services for me, I've said before and will say again, as always, it goes number one on my list, even if it's 3 days a week at 8:15 a.m. and I'm not a morning person. It's just, that's to my core what I'm really, really passionate about. So thankful to still be on that committee. And that's certainly why I picked it, because I have a 20-year background in disability services. The other committees that I was on my first term were Judiciary, Public Safety, and Sustainable Infrastructure with Andy. And I was vice chair of Sustainable Infrastructure, and that was just a one-term committee. So that committee doesn't exist anymore. So then coming into, our second term now, also like both of you said, I kind of wanted to venture in an area that was important to my community, but something that was outside of my own personal educational and experience background. So I was super, super thrilled when I was selected to be on the Environment Committee, and was excited to serve with BFF Kristi here, only to find out that after final negotiations with Republicans, they targeted Finke on public safety, and they wanted her removed and replaced. However, did not say who they would prefer in her place. So here I am.
We miss you in environment, but it's good you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm happy to be on public safety again. It's a good group of folks. It's a new mix of people on our committee this time around, but it's certainly an area that I still care about. But I was really so excited to be on the Environment Committee and ready to dig in and learn so much. And, had to take one for the team and go back to what I knew. So we'll see what happens next term.
And Brion is a powerhouse in public safety. So
Yes,
thank you.
I know that was tough, but you're doing great work there too.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm the only DFL member currently serving who's a former law enforcement officer. We've got a few folks who've worked in public safety, fire, and paramedics, EMTs.
So you're on human services, public safety,
And I'm again on judiciary.
Oh, and judiciary.
Yeah, and that was something that I sort of fell into first term. It was chaired by our near and dear Jamie Becker-Finn, and I really grew to love it. And she sort of had some areas that she passed to me to sort of care for in her absence moving forward. And so I still felt that connection and felt that responsibility to make sure that some of her good work continued. So also sitting on judiciary again.
And that's co-chaired on our side of the aisle with another Rochesterite who hasn't been on the podcast. No, it's not Kim Hicks, but it's Tina Liebling.
Tina Liebling.
Representative Tina Liebling.
3 Rochesterites that are
One of
in
my personal political heroes. She's incredible.
She's so
been in the
great to work with.
legislature like 20 years and is incredibly fierce. All right, let's move to a different area question about communicating with legislators. There's a lot of talk because I can speak from my congressional district. I'm being very upset with my U.S. House representative. So this question, as the interns write it, as a constituent, what is the best way to communicate with legislators? And do you have any thoughts on how constituents currently communicate?
room for improvement.
On which side?
On all sides.
On all sides?
On all
Yeah,
sides.
that's fair.
Yeah, there was a question. I'm not sure that we will address it directly, but one of the interns had some comments about the archaic nature of the website and how to communicate with us. And typically it's like worse at the federal level because it's sort of like more red tape. So always room for improvement, just on the whole, I would say.
This might have been my intern because I gave her a task to give me a count of all of the CS, which is short for constituent services messages, that I've received on every specific topic. Because I wanted to know, like, how much do I actually hear? Because it's hard when it's just an inbox and you see stuff. And I was shocked by how little I receive on each individual topic. Sometimes we get a lot of what are called form letters, where our listeners probably have done this before, even where you go to a website that says, like, legislators are considering this. Be sure that they know you're against it. And, you put your name, you put your address, and it sends to your legislator. Now, those are kind of helpful, because we see that. But I had specifically my intern look at when I receive something that isn't a form letter, that someone has sent me something that they are concerned about. And the most I have ever received on a topic like that isn't form letters is 11. And I want to share that with people because it's not a high number. And that is the highest I've ever seen. And we notice that as legislators. I mean, legislators are checking their emails. So whenever people ask, I say, email your legislators, especially state legislators, because we don't get as many messages as you probably think.
Yeah, I feel like I do sort through a lot of messages, but Andy, like you mentioned, there's a lot of those form emails, and I get hit with a lot of those. And so they tend to jam up my email box, and then it can be really tough to filter through and find the actual emails that were personally written by constituents and then verifiable, right? Because if we respond to every single email that we get without verifying that it's a constituent of ours, we would never get to all of them. And, it's important that your own representative is the one whose office is responding to you. And so I would say, as far as, thoughts on how constituents can communicate, be sure to include your address. It's not for any tracking purposes. It's truly just to make sure that we do represent you and the correct person is responding back to you. And then it makes it easier for us to have a history of our conversations, so I can go back and know that this person had reached out before and these are some issues they care about, and here's where we were at the last time we talked. It just makes it much easier for us to keep track of those conversations. But I agree that email is the best way. I don't know if I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but I know you both know, for as far as voicemails go, I typically don't listen to voicemails unless I can see who it's from and I sort of know that person, because I've unfortunately gotten some really violent voicemails, and it's just not helpful at all for me to filter through any of that to try to get to the good ones, unfortunately. So my LA does do a good job of that. But if you truly want a thoughtful reply from your representative, engage in conversation, and just be thoughtful about it.
Yeah, it can be a dialogue, but not if one person is coming at it being an asshole and being inflammatory.
Right.
That's not helpful, which kind of leads to another question. I don't have anything to add to what you both said. So the one of the questions is about the federal level as well as the state, and local level too. Politics are becoming increasingly partisan. And so how is it that we kind of deal with perhaps different factions, or, what is the best way that we deal with, none of us had this job in the good old days.
That's right.
When legislators were a lot more homogenous and probably a very similar lived experience. And even though they were on different sides of the aisle, that's not the case now. And so it's unsurprising to me that with the different lives that we have all lived and the different experiences that we bring, being more representative of the people who are in our state, then sometimes that makes the temperature go up and tensions can be high. And I think I'll just give an example today. So there was a legislator who has brought some pretty heinous bills forward this year, also has a bill specifically aimed at my kind of landmark legislation that I got passed last year. And, we walked out of committee together today. He's like, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, I was going to record a TikTok, as I leave the Capitol so that it's in the background." And he was like, "Oh, me too, but I'm going to go do it over there. And this is going to be my topic." And it's still like cordial. That's not always the case.
Yeah.
If people are being truly reprehensible and like not admitting to the humanity of other people, that's not an agree to disagree kind of a scenario. But I think for me to compartmentalize, and that's people on our side of the aisle too, that we come down on different places in certain things. And I think it's just important to see people's humanity, and it's important to also show people my humanity and all of our whole richness of who we are as humans, and not just avatars of, the queer caucus lead or the, whatever, like the ideas that they have of us. So I think that that's really important to bring the temperature down. And sometimes it's a lot of theatrics that you see on the House floor too.
That's so true.
Some of that might be real and some might be kind of manufactured for the cameras. I don't know, Andy, your thoughts on this particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I am grounded so personally in a divided house. I don't mean a House of Representatives. I mean, like, in my upbringing. My parents are Republican to the core. My dad's an evangelical pastor, and my mom loves politics. So I know that everything I say is going to be listened to by one person I care very much who radically disagrees with me. And so that I hope is a good like framing for myself as I talk about things, but also not to shy away from things that are really, really important. Because I think sometimes when people talk about partisan divides, they try to make it sound like we should find a middle ground no matter what that is. And literally in our current America, the reason that there are huge partisan divides in some cases is that one side is saying like people's human rights don't matter. People's right to a fair trial and a speedy trial doesn't matter. People's right to life in some cases doesn't matter. And so I am going to pretty strongly speak against that. And even if we're meeting in the middle, that's still a bad place in many of these particular situations. But also, that's not true all the time. And these people who we are talking to are people. And hopefully, I think I can say very clearly with you all, but also most of my colleagues, the reason you get into politics is because you do love people, you want the best for people. And that includes people that we disagree with. And so, as Kristi said, like, there are a lot of people that like I have really good personal relationships with that I think would shock people if, we listed them, like people that I joke with or people that I text on the floor during debates and give good-hearted kind of jabs to. That's real. These are coworkers. It's just in this bizarre area. So I feel like I'm just yes-anding what you said, but it's true. I mean, I think people are shocked when they come to the Capitol and see how often we actually interact with each other.
Yeah, I think too, keeping things less personal, for me, that's been the key between folks who I can still manage to work with, have conversations with that aren't just, a matter of formality through committee and the floor, where I am actually comfortable going up to people in those more informal spaces, talking about bills that we might both care about, some different ideas. Because there certainly are members on the other side of the aisle that, we share some, share some opinions on, but I'm still not comfortable and would not, walk up to them willingly and say, hey, let's work on this bill together. And in those cases, it's because people have taken things too far, have gotten personal, have taken things, online and become incessant trolls about things, even if that has been scaled back recently, which I don't even know if it has because I try not to go on social media anymore. But the damage has been done in some cases. But in others, I know that there are some deep divides, especially, as the chair of the queer caucus currently. Like even yesterday on the floor, I had a pretty innocuous bill on the Department of Corrections, and sure enough, the no crew voted no. And I can guess why, right? There were people with Democrats with bills before and after me that lit up a green board, but let's not give the chair of the queer caucus a full green board, right? So some of those things do still happen, and I do still notice that. But overall, asking people their why, tell me why you believe that, tell me how you know that, share your experience, and then believe it. If we're talking to each other about something and I'm saying, this is what I experienced, take that and believe it, and I will do the same for you, kind of thing. I think that goes along.
So the next question that I actually don't have an answer for, but I'm curious if you guys do. What was the scariest bill you had to oppose? Maybe this will remind me if you have something to share.
I can start.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have two, and one from each session so far that I've served. So the first one is actually on my very first day in health committee. We were talking about health committee earlier. In 2024, after our big trifecta victory, one of our huge emphases, rightly, as we now know, was to codify abortion rights in Minnesota and put the strongest possible language in law. So the first bill we heard on the first day that I was in committee was the Protect Reproductive Options Act, the PRO Act. And that brought out
Blockbuster.
all the activists, and I spoke on that. This isn't really opposing a bill, I guess, but this is a bill that I had to speak on. So the pro-life activists were following me out of committee, and they
Oh,
followed
right. Oh, I remember this.
into an elevator. They were recording me, and they tried to follow me into my office in a very aggressive way. And it ended up that they made a video that had like crosshairs on my face. So that was like the first day I was ever in committee, was like this very like literally in your face aggression, and also led to like subtle threats on my life afterwards. So that was like terrifying from an actual like.
That's my constituent. I'm sorry, but then he was banned from coming into our office for the next
He
2
was,
weeks.
which was good.
Yeah.
Which is good. So that was like the first thing I thought of. But the honest, like the real one, that bill that I had to oppose, and this is, I was raised on Harry Potter. So as Dumbledore said, it takes courage to stand up to your enemies, but much more courage to stand up to your friends. There was a bill that was chief authored by a DFL member about Medigap coverages, which is kind of in the weeds of Medicare policy. But it would take away what we currently have, which is an open enrollment period for certain plans where people can get on these plans to get supplemental coverage for Medicare prescriptions. It's really important. Easy way of saying that is kind of a backdoor for insurance companies can deny people for pre-existing conditions. And so I was speaking against this. The insurance lobby wanted it, and it got onto our commerce policy bill, and I had to vote against an amendment, and I voted against the entire policy bill in our commerce committee because of this. So that was probably the scariest, because it wasn't against sort of the other caucus. It was against someone who was on the committee with me, who was sitting right across from me as I was speaking about how I thought this was a very, very harmful amendment. So that's hard to do.
Brion, do you have any that come to mind?
Yeah, I was trying to think about this question where kind of like Andy was describing, where the scariest scenario or like kind of the most anxiety I've had. And I think it's true that those times when we have a deep disagreement with a colleague on our same side, that's a tough thing to do, to vote against it. But we do it. For folks who maybe claim that we don't, it certainly does happen, and it's very uncomfortable, but we all have our own election certificates. I had an email recently from somebody who said, I know you're just going to do what Melissa Hortman tells you to do, which I find funny on many levels, because I think Speaks would disagree based on our own interactions that we've had over the last few years. We do not share the same opinions on a variety of things, things, but I do admire the hell out of her, and she is the strategy queen. And there's a reason that I voted for her to be our team's leader, right? But no, I agree with Andy that it's tough to take votes against your own team, but the DFL is a big tent and growing for good reason. And so, I think I had voted against a couple of budget bills in the past and on the floor. Yeah. And it's something that gets noticed and you do stand out for it and you might take some heat for it. But I made those decisions based on the emails I got from my constituents and what they told me they cared about. And I couldn't in good conscience vote for some of the changes that were proposed. Right.
And on your values.
Right.
And because I think the one scenario I can think of is sort of the reverse of this, which was perhaps one of those red votes that you gave, a DFL bill, if I'm remembering, Brion. We had a bill come out of the Environment Committee, and there were 4 members of our caucus who went to the speaker and demanded that one of my bills that was in the omnibus bill be killed. They didn't come talk to me about it. They ran to the speaker. They didn't even talk to the committee chair. And so this was all kind of done behind the backs of the people who should have at least given me the courtesy that this was my bill. It was a very controversial bill, super important bill. This is a thing I have been tracking for the last 10 years. And we had to vote on the floor for these amendments to strip it out of the bill. And there were several DFLers who were so mad at the process. Basically, I got screwed. And so I voted for the bill as like a good teammate, but
behind the scenes, Kristi, there were a couple of us leading the charge.
I was really, really upset. And honestly, it was like, that was sort of my first experience with like dem on dem violence. And this is the time of year that this happens.
Yeah.
And because we're a big tent and because we don't have, for example, a pro-environment majority in our caucus, this is often where rubber meets the road and where the friction really is. And I think we're going to see that probably again this year with our budget bills.
Yeah.
Chipping away at environmental protection. And that's my wheelhouse and that's where I come from. And so even if, it didn't look like super unified on the board, I appreciated that, I had colleagues who were like, F this noise.
Yep.
This is not okay. And
I believe the majority of this podcast said F that noise.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was. That's
thanks, friends.
Exactly what I was referring to, Kristi. And you can bet that I was recruiting as many people as possible to vote no on your behalf. So,
well, I saw those red dots. I know the Republicans were sort of scratching their heads, but I was like, thank you so much to the people who were like, this process is shitty, or they thought like, that's a really good provision and we need to have that citizens board back at the MPCA to look at, environmental bad actors. Right. So, and interesting fact, of those 4, guess how many are still in the House with us? 1. So, interesting. I would hope that he wouldn't try to cross me again. I talked to all of them individually after this happened and basically was just like, yo, talk to me. I was really, really upset, but I'm a fast learner. So that will never happen again. I continued to have great working relationships with these people on the whole.
Yep.
And that's just like we talked about with our Republican colleagues.
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, there are times where even in the same party, we vehemently disagree on something. But at we're leaving the Capitol. Bye, love you. Have a great night. Like, we're besties at high school, right? Like, we're tight. We're close. We can have solid disagreements and still have each other's backs.
Okay, that leads me to the next question. I feel like I'm a little bit taking the Andy role just because I want to do the questions in order. What have been the most valuable people to meet in your time in the House? I just thought that dovetailed nicely because we were talking about like some hard things sometimes with colleagues, but like, and also the definition of valuable.
I was
it's not
say,
like,
Kristi, I think all people are valuable. I don't know what you're trying to really.
I didn't come up with this question. We'll blame the intern.
Oh, poor intern. I'll jump in here. I was thinking about this and coming from, because none of us came from a world of politics. And I think immediately one of the things that I noticed and continue to recognize and admire is the genius in the staff that work at the Capitol.
Ding, ding, ding. That's all of our answer, I think.
I mean, holy cow. Just encyclopedias of information. On the fly, you ask nonpartisan research staff about how some statute from 1985 is connected to what we're doing today. And they'll just sort of like look for a second and go, okay, well, in 1985, we passed this, but then in 1993, it was discussed that we were going to do this. And then in 1997, and they just give you the whole history and off the top of their head. Just genius, dedicated people. And because of the nature of the work we do, they are always working longer hours than we are. So anytime that we send an email and can we get an amendment to this? My job might be done for the day, but their job just got added to, right? So hands down, most valuable folks that I've met at the house are the wonderful staff behind every single thing that we do.
And they're not doing it like no one outside of that building knows their names.
Nope.
Yep.
No one even understands what their title could possibly mean that they do. Brion and I, maybe a couple months ago now, did a training with the chief clerk. And we got to, deepen our relationship with some of the staff that, are sitting up at the front, or they're all the way up on like the third floor. And these people make that place run.
Yep.
And they don't have a microphone, and they may not be on the TV, but like it is truly incredible. Talk about dedication to public service, and not just necessarily the nonpartisan staff, but like, the DFL research staff and the comm staff, and we've been talking about LAs. Those are our legislative assistants.
Mm-hmm.
And just truly the dedication and the teamwork and the care and the vision for this institution, and for good governance, and for the people and the land of Minnesota. It's just, obviously I've made some wonderful friends who are members, and I have made wonderful lifelong friends with the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're just so remarkable, and so just the unsung heroes. And I think when I first got to the house, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of other people here who I don't know.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time because there are a lot of folks to make democracy happen. Right. And, different nonpartisan staff and different nonpartisan fiscal staff for each committee. So switching committees, it's like, who are these folks?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really cool. And I think we all just respect the hell out of them and try to make their lives not terrible.
Yeah.
Like when we adjourn at midnight, that clerk staff, they're there for at least another hour, maybe 2, finishing up the things. So I think that goes a long way too, of us just understanding enough to know how not to make their difficult job even more difficult. And especially in the last 5 weeks that we'll have after our break. Some long days for us, even longer for the staff.
Yep.
Andy, what were you going to say?
The real answer is like the people that no one knows about, that staff that we work with all the way down the line, and they want us to not know about them. The public, they do an incredible job.
Yes.
And it's such a delight to work with. So knowledgeable. And then, it's the people that we work with. We're friends here. Like as soon as we turn the recording off, we usually talk for like 20 minutes, even though we work in the same building every day, because we just really like each other. You just meet really cool people.
I know, we don't see each other. There's always more to talk about.
Exactly. And so that's really wonderful. We can talk about like people that we've met, because of this position that we wouldn't. Kristi can tell about her friend Joe that she's met many times. Biden. Sorry, were you confused? Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. One word.
Joe Biden.
We have met the governor, know Keith Ellison. Like those are really cool people, but it's like the people we work with every day is kind of, I think everyone would say is like what brings some real life to this job.
Yeah.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's ask this one, and we have to be super careful about this answer because it's one of the cardinal rules. Intern wrote this. Could you talk a bit more about what happens in caucus?
What happens in caucus stays in caucus.
That's right.
We should say, like, what is, because I think we obviously know what caucus is, but not everyone might not know what that term means.
Well, I'll
Do you wanna
say,
give 60
yeah, when
seconds?
we
Go ahead.
came in, it was so confusing because caucus is both a noun and a verb.
Yes.
And as a word person, I was like, wait, we're going to caucus? Or am I in
Are we caucusing?
caucus? Are we
Yeah.
caucusing?
Right.
Yeah. And I think Minnesotans are used to that, like how you vote at a caucus where you go in a big room and go to different
Right.
corners and stuff. Like,
Right.
that's not what we're doing when we say caucus at the legislature. Although sometimes we probably should have people very clear about what they think. But what happens, Brion?
Well, I think this question is like we talked about, there's a variety of meanings of caucus. It could essentially a group of people. But I think this question is getting at caucus meetings, when a caucus of folks get together and talk about something. In our work at the House, there's essentially two types of caucuses that happen on a regular basis. One is a committee caucus, where you and the rest of your party members of a committee will meet regularly to discuss the topics that are coming up in your committee, talk about strategy, talk about priorities, all that kind of stuff. I think this question is getting at the caucus in general, when the whole party as a team meets. Both parties do this before floor sessions to prepare for the upcoming session and go over any last minute things that we might need to go over. And we also carve out time during the week to meet as a group to talk about upcoming bills, you know, how things are going at the legislature, updates about the Senate. And so that's sort of the lay of the land when we're talking about what it means to be in caucus, is to be in one of these meetings with a group of our colleagues.
And that's often the only time we're all together,
Right.
or mostly all together. And so we get in that room and I'm always like, oh, yeah. Because there's some people, my cubicle isn't nearby. I'm not on any committees with. And so this is sort of the one space and time we're all together. So even just like announcements of like, oh, make sure you have this paperwork in, or, this break is coming up, or, that's like just the time that we have all together once a week.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah, it's almost always two things. It's briefings, because we're so segmented, we're never together. And so there's some bills you've never seen until they're for the floor. So we just have to get briefed on the actual information of stuff that is happening from around the legislature. And then the second thing, the really only thing that we haven't covered is, like, as Brion mentioned earlier, we do have a large tent party. So sometimes there is just times where we need no cameras, no media, no lobbyists. This is just us in this room. And we even, like, send out staff that we just talked glowingly about and say, okay, it's just us in here. What do you think about this bill? Why do some people like it? Why do some people not? Kind of gauging where people are. And it's the only time really we can do that because of, the nature of our job. So that makes caucus very important, very valuable.
Yeah, it's critical, I think, to the work that we do. And sometimes it can be tension filled, and that's okay, because that is the time and space to do that. It's sort of like a family meeting. We're all family and there's certain dynamics, and, oh, I roll, this person is of course going to bring this thing up, or, or there are people who like never speak in caucus. And then when they do speak, everyone sort of gets quiet and is like, oh, so there's just like a lot of dynamics. Of course, there are 67 members in the DFL caucus, 67 in the Republicans. So we don't know exactly what happens over there in the room across the hall. But it's a similar structure, I'm imagining.
Yeah. And we also will talk about how things are going for people. Sort of, it's a good time to check in and offer reminders to, like, how to take care of yourself. Give shout outs to people who have done really good, hard, meaningful work that's been noticed. And so it's a great time too to uplift people. And just, do some of that team building sort of thing that really helps us move our work along together.
And eat snacks.
Yeah.
And sometimes there are
Snacks.
great snacks. And one question we didn't get to is one of the interns asked, like, what do you wish we had more time for? And for me personally, I wish we had more time where we were all just in the room caucusing about our disagreements. We just don't do that enough because it's hard for the time and what we're all doing. But I found those incredibly valuable discussions when we do them. But when we're done caucusing, it's time for the floor session. And so we are now at our final question, and this is a good final question both of this episode and as we look into our break, because we are probably going to have some memorable floor sessions in the very near future. So intern
Oh, sure.
asks, what was the most memorable floor session you've ever had? And I'm very curious if we're all going to pick the same one. So should we do like a 3 count and all say it at once? And then see if
Great.
it's the same thing, and then we can go from there.
This might be really hard to edit for me, but let's try it.
We'll try
Okay,
it.
apologies to future Kristi. All right, here we go. So it's after 3. Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Trans refuge.
Trans refuge.
We knew it. We figured that this would be the case. Well,
Yep.
and it was the only all-nighter that we have ever pulled all together, the 3 of us. So like, of course, that's going to be memorable. Okay, I have a few quick stories, and I want to hear your stories from that time too. Wait, was that 14 hours or so that we
went until about 5:30 a.m.
And we
did
started
we
at
probably
3:30.
started at like 3:30?
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
we must have started at 3:30. Yep.
So, a couple of things. So, one, we talked about on the episode that you were not invited to, Andy Smith.
It's
My
fine.
highlight was when we had the Minnesota Frost, and the team asked this of Isabel, who's the staff person who is like kind of shuttling them, and she said the same thing. She said the trans refuge bill. And I thought that was awesome. There is one member of the Minnesota Frost who has said some kind of sketchy, questionable things about trans people. But like Isabel wasn't saying that just to like poke at that player. Like this is it. We all came up with this on our own of like, this was really memorable. Another thing I'll say about this is that Samantha Vang, who was the chair of the Ag Committee, where I was the vice chair, she's a very small Hmong woman. And at one point I went back to the alcove and it looked like a pile of coats, except then I saw a pair of shoes on the floor and someone was like, Sam's under there. And she was like completely covered, just looked like a bunch of puffy coats. And she must have had like her legs tucked up or something and was, I guess, asleep, like sitting up on the bench in the alcove. And I remember thinking like, we are all here. We are all doing whatever it takes, and we're all doing it in our own way of however it is that we survive. I went up to the little nap room to take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people were just caffeinating all night. Like we were doing what we needed to do. But even though it was hard and we had to listen to a bunch of bullshit, it was also so, so joyful. And I want to hear the stories you both have. Brion?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned finding sleeping legislators because it truly was. It was a long, long night. I remember walking into the caucus room, and of course, lights were low because it's the middle of the night at some point, 2, 3 a.m., who knows? And just the reality of seeing elected officials trying to take whatever space they can along the wall to get a little bit of sleep under a table with like a jacket, or maybe they brought a blanket, and you're seeing like chairs of committees like under a chair sleeping. And I'm like, this is not a sexy job whatsoever. Elected officials literally just sleeping on the floor of a meeting room. We couldn't leave the Capitol. And, you know, that's the kind of dedication that it takes. It's not glamorous whatsoever. And I did, Kristi, you mentioned the nap room. I did make a trip up to the nap room as well during Trans Refuge Night. It was all Republicans at the time who were up there, but I didn't have it in me to be obnoxious to like keep everybody awake. That was just like I didn't need any more attention, right? So I went up there for a little bit, but it was just weird and uncomfortable. So I went back to the floor.
I gave a tour of the Capitol and I like to hit the nap room. And my friend is like, what a fucked up job you have that they build in a nap room because they know you're going to be sleep deprived and working ridiculous hours. And I was like, you're right. But because that is a job, I'm sure glad that there are spaces.
Yes. I will say late maybe 4 or so in the morning. Republicans were just picking on whoever was on the floor, whoever appeared the most tired that they could catch off guard, who is in a swing district, who could they, try to get some sort of, bad quote from or something. And I remember it was around 4 in the morning or so. One of them had called on our good friend Josiah Hill and said, "What if a child wanted to be a girl?" and da 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 da. And he just very like simple and eloquently said, like, I would support her in any way that she needed. And it was just in the middle of the night when probably nobody was watching, trying to pick on somebody and get some sort of response. And he just like, even though we were sleepy and sort of caught off guard, it was just such a beautiful and genuine answer. And it was just like, yeah, we're doing the right thing. Like, we are here doing the right thing. So there were moments there that really, as horrible as it got, felt really, really good.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's our longest floor session we've ever had. So that by itself, I mean, I don't think you can describe till you're there what it means for us to be there that long and not being able to go anywhere. But even outside of the oddities around that, it was just this incredibly, like, I think used the word noble, like fight that it felt like we were in. And it was exhausting. And it really was, everyone had to be on the team, had to be ready to go on these. As you said, people are picking people off. But then the folks who were at the forefront of that, Representative Lee Finke, Brion, yourself, Jamie Becker Finn at that point, um, talking for hours and hours and hours. And for those folks in particular, sometimes had to debate their very existence to people publicly in this public thing, and did so eloquently, beautifully, passionately, and as you said, like Representative Hill, like kind of unexpected, not because, I wouldn't expect him to be good on this, just like you don't normally hear everyone talk on these, having these moments of clarity, and in the midst of this hard thing, winning basic human rights for a group of that people who didn't understand the issue or did understand the issue and had some hate in their hearts were coming to persecute and harm. We were able to defend them, and we came out, and that bill passed, and it got signed into law, and it is law now. It is truly like a night and then a morning that I will never forget. And I would encourage people, if you're hearing this and wanting to like hear about that, I posted on my TikTok Rep Finke's final comments on that night. Go find it, go listen to it. She was incredible, and our caucus as a whole. I mean, you heard from the three of us. We're not gonna forget that moment.
And there were people listening. There were people in the gallery who stayed.
All
And
night.
dedicated activists and people with queer family members and queer people and trans people themselves. And it was so beautiful. They were sitting in a part, like the opposite side of the gallery of the chamber. And so we could all see them. And they were doing like applause, ASL, because you're not supposed to make noise. But I mean, just the like palpable relief and joy. And it was a really hard thing, especially for our colleagues who are in the trans caucus, but absolutely gratifying to get to do that. And sure, we had to listen to a bunch of garbage, but worth it. It was really special.
Absolutely worth it. And there was a group of us who gathered down on the floor watching the board for the final results. And we just sort of looked up at Speaker Hortman, and she gave us announced it, and we knew that it passed. And so there's this really beautiful photo, I think, in the Star Tribune of sort of this overhead shot of the group hug that we had. And then when the Senate then had their moment to pass, a very similar moment, a bunch of us went over there, and highly memorable for me as well. The real tears came when the Senate finally passed it, and just the incredible work that everyone did to get there. It took our whole team, and I'm very, very grateful.
So that certainly helped bond us all together, us new libs.
It sure did.
Getting to have this big agenda item and getting it over the finish line.
Yeah, we probably should have mentioned, I think that was it our second or third month on the job when that happened? Was that February?
I believe that was in March 2023.
Okay.
So we were 3 months on it, but it still felt very, very early, and it did really cement the bonds of that whole caucus to this day for many of us. But I don't think we're going to be able to end on a better note than that, and end not just this episode, but sort of this half of the season. So again, we will miss you for a couple of weeks. If you have any questions, you can always email us or find us on Blue Sky or Facebook and message through there questions about what's happening, and we'll hopefully be able to answer those questions when we're back first week of June. Otherwise, you have heard from the new Libs and their interns, and now go out on the block.
Bye.
Bye. Do a heart?
I tried to do a heart. Wait, how do the kids? I don't care.